Hi folks, we're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about, two things really. One is the ever increasing tightening and rationing of medical resources that's being brought about in Western countries by mass immigration. So not only is there mass immigration, but so many of the mass immigrants are allowed to bring their family members over, many of whom are handicapped in some way. Now, this is particularly the case with the Muslim diaspora, Bangladesh, Pakistan, that sort of thing, or the Middle East generally, where it's quite acceptable, in fact, desirable, and certainly the rural villages, is to marry one's cousins. So now the handicaps amongst children, from cousin procreation is about 15 times higher than sort of the average, if you like, handicap range. Now that's on birth, but if you take it over a longer period of time, when I say 15 times higher amongst those Muslim diasporas, the cousin marriages thing, this is some serious handicaps or deformities upon birth. No toes or one arm instead of two, or things like that. But when you look at over a longer span of time, say the first 20 or 30 years of someone's life, then the handicaps are 6 out of 10 of these people are sufficiently handicapped as to need some sort of state aid. So you can imagine the expense and the amount of medical resources that have to be directed towards these people. So I want to talk about that on one side, and then the rationing of medical resources on the other. Now, there was a time in Australia when you could call up and see the doctor on pretty much the same day, or you could even just go and sit in the waiting room, and the doctor would see you, and everything would be taken care of. It was depending on the level of care you were getting, it was something the state would pay for. So through the medical benefits, which you paid through the medical benefits levy, or certainly in Australia, or through your taxation, or mix of both. But that's changed now, even in outer suburban or rural areas, or semi-rural areas in Australia at least. Two things have happened, a number of things have happened. Most of the medical centres have been bought up by international venture capital firms, and they're out to transfer wealth from the taxpayer into the pockets of the medical benefit. Why that was allowed or condoned, I think, is part of the wider globalization thing, where you have big finance extracting profits via the taxpayers through the government. So, but these medical centres now, quite brazenly, even though they're meant to be supplying medical services to all who come, instead they're playing a game now where if you want to see a doctor today, firstly, they won't let you walk in and wait anymore. You can't do that. It has to be by appointment, which then gives them an opportunity to filter you out and say, look, if you want to see a doctor over the next few days, then you're going to have to pay a levy. So they still claim from the government what they would have claimed, but you have to pay an extra $25, $35, $40 to see the doctor if you want to. So that's if you want to see a doctor quickly. If you want to see the doctor of your choice, say an English-speaking doctor, or a doctor speaks English as a first language, then again you have to pay the levy. So if you're prepared to wait a week and see any doctor they assign to you, only then will the government in effect pay for your medical appointment. And so when you get to see a doctor, it can be someone who barely speaks English, and you just wonder how on earth they got to be a doctor, and they just run straight off a checklist that they have. They don't seem to know anything about doctoring or medicine or anything like that. They just run rigidly to the checklist, and that's it. So why you would have to pay for that's beyond me. Or why that's called medical advice is similarly beyond me. But Nonetheless, this is causing a rationing because there are now many more people accessing the medical services, but there hasn't been a corresponding increase in doctors. And again, the big venture capital firms have bought up a lot of the medical centres. So this is in combination is causing, the venture capital firms are obviously got a vested interest in reducing the quantity of medical services and their quality too. Using third world doctors, paying them less, that type of thing. So using these medical to reduce the amount of services available, which then artificially inflates the price. Then you include the mass migration, which then artificially inflates the number of patients seeking a reducing amount of medical services. So that's what's going on in the background. But there's another thing, and this probably concerns me, and it should concern most of us more than anything, which is this: the standard that white people are held to compared to the third world immigrants who come in, and what standard they're held to before they receive medical services. Now, it's illegal for white people to marry their first and second cousins. You can marry your third cousin, or is it the fourth? I can't remember now. But like the fifth cousin is definitely okay. So that's like your great grandparents. You have the same great grandparents, I think, and everyone else is different. So that the first cousin is like you got the same sort of parents, then second cousin the same grandparents, and so on. So the amount of people from certain diasporas, like from Pakistan and Bangladesh and so on, they are allowed to marry their first cousins. There seems to be no restriction on that. They can even send for brides and husbands back in the village of their ancestors and bring them over and their cousins. There's no control or any attempt to police or control that at all. You're now in a country where that's illegal. So if you don't like that, don't come to this country because it's illegal to do that here. Marry your cousin. But there's no stopping of that. But they're still given access to medical services very generously. So there's no bar. The bar for them to access medical services is very, very low. So they can get access to vast community and taxpayer-funded resources for their handicapped offspring that they could never dream of getting in Pakistan or somewhere like that. And those offspring would die fairly young, most of the time die fairly young, which is why they sometimes procreate to, 10 children per woman and that sort of thing, because the death rate from inbreeding is so high. Now, when they come to the West, of course, given all the medical resources that are made available to them, these handicapped children, as a result of cousin marriages, they survive. They don't die young as they would in Afghanistan or somewhere like that. So these handicapped kids, because first cousin marriage is permitted for some reason, uniquely for this diaspora, they survive. So they require vast medical resources throughout their whole life when they could live to be 40 years old. And every day is a vast expenditure of, again, taxpayer resources to keep them alive. So now contrast this though with a white person. So if a white person wants to have, fairly basic sort of operation, or requires it, medical operation, that they'd be in the morning and out in the afternoon. It's not like it's a huge deal where they're in hospital for years or anything like that. And but there'll be quite a high bar set. So you'll have to stop drinking. You can't smoke. You have to reduce the sugar and cholesterol in your diet. So there's a lot of criteria the white person has to meet. And if they don't do this, they're refused medical services. So they'll give them a blood test to make sure they meet all the criteria, and the threshold of don't drink, don't smoke, don't have too much fat in your diet, this sort of thing. And if they don't, they're refused medical services. They must meet that high bar, otherwise no medical services. That's it. And if they die in the meantime, because it's too bad, you didn't meet the bar. That was, so it's very strictly managed, very strictly applied in terms of white people. but not so in terms of these other groups from these third world with terribly self-destructive behaviours in terms of their health. But the bar for them is set very low, so they can access things that white people couldn't dream of. Just another one, somebody who say is overweight and they need a knee or a hip replacement, something of that ilk. And but if they're white, it's that no, you have to meet a certain threshold of weight. If you don't get your weight down to a certain, no, I do understand this, by the way. If you've got if you're overweight to a certain extent, the likelihood of the replacement of the hip or the knee, functioning, or that it's going to need replacing again another year or two is high. So I do understand the application of that, but that's not applied to anyone else. It's only applied to these white people. So and if they don't meet the weight requirement, then they just can't access the. Now this is the same whether it be in Britain or Australia and New Zealand and so on. The white people have to meet that criteria, a criteria that's not anywhere near strictly police, if enforced, if at all, on other racial groups. So we're seeing, I think, two-tier policing we've seen in England and so on, with the Muslim rights and the like in London. But I think we're seeing, multi-tier, two-tier application of medical services as well, and using rationing medical services. So there's no rationing when it comes to looking after certain diasporas that are creating their own problems in a big way. But there is very strict application of standards and a high bar if the patient is white. Now, some of the activists, social justice activists, say, well, the white people should know better, and they're they speak the language and they have a first world lifestyle, so they should know better, whereas these people are coming. But that's not the case. Even third and fourth generation, Pakistanis and Afghan, Muslims in general, are still first cousin marrying. So that's not an issue if they've just come from the third world and they can't speak the language. It's not that. There was a recent, I think it was in Britain, where there's a recent study where they're celebrating the fact that cousin marriages amongst even third and fourth generation Muslims in England, that cousin marriages has at last dropped below 50%. Just I think it's like 48% or something, dropped below 50%. So it gives you an idea of the scale of the problem and how. You imagine this: if you said to any Muslim coming to Britain, or coming to the West, or wanting to come to the West, look, you won't be able to bring out your family members, not on. You won't be able to marry your cousin or your second cousin or your third cousin, this sort of thing. You won't be able to do any of that. You won't be able to bring brides in from the. They go, oh, holy crap, I'm not going to go to that Western country if those are the requirements. So that's how easy it would be to stop migration from the third world, certainly from that diaspora. So something to think about there. You've been at Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.